Welcome to Starbound. My name is General G, and it is my honor to be your narrator today. Over 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including new episodes of Sunspire Academy, Frarian and Remeke, and we've got some new series coming your way soon. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. If nothing else, please like and subscribe. Now, let's get into today's story. The distress beacon screamed across 33 frequencies, each pulse a dying machine's desperate plea, bleeding from the nebula designated NH7739. Spacers, in their gallows humor, had a name for it: the Graveyard Spiral. It was a cosmic whirlpool of charged gas and gravitational eddies, a place where ships that ventured too deep had a bad habit of becoming permanent residents. But Captain Kovar of the Redemption's Chain had hauled recycled Atmos scrubbers through worse, and his battered freighter needed every credit this milk run to the Kestis mining colony would bring. His communications array, a patchwork of salvage tech and stubborn engineering, suddenly chirped a different tune, buried beneath the standard SOS, encrypted in military code so ancient his translator hiccuped trying to parse it. Pulsed a secondary signal: Asset Recovery, Priority 1. It broadcast on channels that had gone dark 50 years ago, when the monolithic Directorate fell and scattered its secrets to the void. Kovar's obsidian faceplate, a smooth, featureless mask to most species, shifted. Patterns of cool blue doubt swirled beneath the polished surface, their colors shimmering like a beetle's carapace in faint light. He knew those encryption standards. He knew their cold, mathematical precision because he had helped write them, back in a life he'd tried to bury, back when he believed optimal strategic solutions could fix the galaxy's myriad problems, back when casualty projections were just numbers on a screen, abstract and clean. "Captain," Sill's voice, bright and sharp as a ship's bell, cut through his reverie. From the pilot station, she turned, her hollow-boned frame nearly vibrating with curiosity. "You're doing that purple thing again? Deep purple. What did the nebula do to you?" He caught himself. Purple meant guilt in lumen color language, a private shame his crew had learned to read with unnerving accuracy. The patterns faded back to a neutral, contemplative blue. "It's nothing. An echo." "Looks like more than an echo," Grail rumbled from the engineering console behind him. Her upper two hands, thick with muscle and stained with grease, flicked through diagnostics while her lower arms stayed crossed in a posture of permanent disapproval. The Jordian was a monument to pragmatism. "That new signal you've isolated is Directorate, top-tier military encryption." "Grail, can you get a precise source?" Kovar asked, his voice a low thrum from his vocalizer. "Already on it." Her thick fingers danced across the console. "It's deep in the spiral, 3, maybe 4 hours out of our way. Asset recovery screams military salvage. High risk, low probability of reward." She grunted, a sound like grinding gears. "Could be pirates using old codes as bait. The Vokari are known for it. They scavenge old Directorate tech, get some old code breaker to crack a piece of it, and set a trap." "When's the last time you saw a real Directorate tech, though?" Sill countered, already abandoning her flight path to plot new ones. The simian pilot's quicksilver reflexes extended to her enthusiasm. 19 different approach vectors bloomed on her screen, weaving through the nebula's gravitational maze before anyone could object. "That encryption is bleeding power, leaking into civilian channels. If we can hear it, every other salvager in 3 systems will pick it up within a day. We've got first-mover advantage." From the doorway to the medical bay, which doubled as the galley, Flynn's whiskers twitched. The Kith medic clutched a tray of freshly baked protein bars, his latest attempt to improve shipboard cuisine with a cocktail of alien species. "We're already behind schedule," he said, his voice a soft counterpoint to the bridge's tension. "The mining colony, their water recyclers are failing. They're counting on our scrubbers." Kovar weighed the options. The colony needed them, the crew needed to get paid. But that signal, Priority 1, that designation wasn't for a piece of hardware. It was for something irreplaceable. Something they had considered more valuable than a ship or a fleet. The colony will survive another day without their scrubbers, Kovar decided, the purple of guilt deepening once more in his faceplate. They've got reserves. This is a ghost I have to see. He turned to his crew. Syl, plot the most conservative course you can stand. Grail, prep the salvage gear. Let's assume it's a trap until proven otherwise. Flynn, he looked at the trembling medic. Make something warm. I have a feeling we'll need it. Flynn nodded, his large, dark eyes conveying a worry that transcended species. Hot soup, my grandmother's recipe. It is tactically comforting. He disappeared back into the galley, the scent of unidentifiable but pleasant spices following him. Kovar faced the swirling viewport, the graveyard spiral beckoning. He was chasing a ghost, not for profit, but for penance. He just hoped it wouldn't drag them all down with him. The source of the signal drifted in the nebula's heart like a metal coffin. It was a life pod, ancient but miraculously still powered. Its hull stamped with the faded starburst insignia of the Directorate fleet. Frost crystallized on its small viewport in delicate, fractal patterns, catching the chain's salvage lights and glittering against the stellar dust. The asset recovery signal pulsed stronger here, almost frantic, as if the pod itself were screaming for attention. Things older than some colonies, Grail muttered over the comms, her voice laced with a mechanic's skepticism. She expertly maneuvered the chain's salvage arms, her four hands working in perfect concert. The power cell is probably held together by prayer and duct tape, ready for a maglock. The clamps engaged with a solid resonating thud that vibrated through the freighter's deck. Grail's upper hands, however, gestured in disgust at the military markings. Directorate Black Project hardware. Nothing good ever came out of those. Life signs? Kovar asked, his gaze fixed on the med scanner repeater above the cockpit viewport. He already saw the flicker, a weak but persistent blip. Flynn's voice came over the internal comm, hushed and strained. Captain, there's something in there. Alive, humanoid, but the readings they're so small, so faint. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pierced Kovar's calculated calm. He sealed the bridge and met Grail and Flynn at the airlock connecting to the salvage bay. The pod sat under the harsh work lights, an alien tomb in their familiar cluttered hold. The hatch hissed open with a drawn-out protest of ancient frozen seals. Crystallized atmosphere puffed out in a cold cloud that made Flynn sneeze. Inside, on a narrow bench that doubled as a medical berth, lay a child. A human child. The silence in the cargo bay was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ship's life support. Grail, who could wrestle a 2-ton power conduit into place, stumbled backward a full step, her lower arms windmilling for balance. Even Syl, who had patched in on a remote viewer from the bridge, went silent, her usual chatter choked off. The boy couldn't be more than 12 standard years old. He was pale as processed protein paste, dressed in a form-fitting gray jumpsuit marked with a faded designation, Echo 7. His black hair was cropped to a regulation length, revealing a scalp that had likely never known sunlight. Then his eyes snapped open. There was no drowsy awakening, no moment of confusion. One instant he was inert, the next he was a study in pure predatory awareness. He sat up in a single sharp, impossibly fluid movement, his spine perfectly straight, his hands placed parallel on his knees. Operational status, suboptimal. Current location, unknown. Identify. Authority figure present? The words emerged in flat, accentless English, a language most of the galaxy only knew from historical data files. Kovar's translator caught up a second later, but the damage was done. This was a human, a living myth from the long-lost cradle world, and it was speaking in tactical combat directives. Kovar forced his vocalizer to work. "I am Captain Kovar of the Redemption's Chain," he managed, the synthetic voice struggling with the weight of the moment. "You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" The boy's head tilted exactly 15 degrees, a calculated mechanical angle for optimal audio reception. Designation: Echo 7. Project: Chimera. Primary handlers: MOTHER and CAIN. Military-grade training constructs. Query: Are you Directorate aligned? The Directorate fell 50 years ago, Grail said, her voice a low growl as she found her footing. It's just us, civilians, a freighter crew. Classification required. The boy's gaze flickered between them, assessing the threat levels, posture, equipment. Directorate dissolution renders command structure void. Chimera Directive Section 7 states, in absence of military authority, asset defaults to survival mode pending retrieval. His young face showed no more emotion than the hull of a pod as he rattled off regulations like a shopping list. Asset recovery beacon activated per subsection 3A. Time elapsed since activation: 72 hours, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Flynn, his medic's instincts finally overriding his profound species shock, pushed past his fear. You must be cold, hungry. Here, I brought... He fumbled with the protein bar he'd tucked into his pocket. Nutritional requirements, minimal. Cryostasis reduces metabolic function to 12% baseline. Temperature tolerance within acceptable parameters. The boy, Echo 7, watched Flynn's gentle approach with the unblinking stare of a predator assessing a strange new animal. He tracked the protein bar as if it were a potential weapon. Query: What is your tactical designation? I'm the cook, Flynn said softly, his whiskers twitching in what his species considered a calming gesture. And the medic. Sort of. It's a small ship. We all wear a few hats. Dual role assignment. Efficient. Echo 7's gaze softened by a fraction of a degree. He accepted the protein bar, turning it over in his small hands, examining its density, its wrapper, its texture with the same analytical intensity. Nutritional content adequate. Flavor profile irrelevant. He bit into it mechanically, his jaw moving with precise rhythmic motions. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't just salvaged a pod, they had salvaged a ghost forged into a machine. They brought him aboard because leaving a child, even one that talked like a military computer, to drift in a dead nebula wasn't an option. The crew gathered in the common room, a small, worn space that usually echoed with easy camaraderie and Sill's terrible jokes. Now the silence was heavy enough to bend light. Grail tapped a restless, four-fingered rhythm on the table. Sill stared into her drink, a vibrant swirl of simian nectar, uncharacteristically quiet. They had found a legend, and the weight of it pressed the air from the room. Echo 7 sat at their battered table, posture perfect, hands folded. He answered their questions with the same detached cadence, his monotone voice building a picture that made Kovar's lights cycle through increasingly troubled patterns of deep violet and gray. The questions came in a halting flood, the crew trying to piece together the impossible. So, who were these handlers? Sill asked, leaning forward, trying to find a crack in his composure. Mother and Kane. AI constructs, Echo 7 stated. Mother was the military operations tactical heuristic education resource. Kane was the combat analysis and intelligence network. Together, they provided comprehensive military education for the duration of my development. Flynn's whiskers drooped. They were your parents? The word felt alien and clumsy in this context. Negative. They were training constructs. Parental units implies emotional attachment. Mother and Kane maintained professional distance as per Chimera Directive Section 2 to prevent suboptimal emotional dependencies. So, you were alone with them? Grail's voice was rough. In this facility? Affirmative. Facility designation, Blackwater Station. Location, classified. Population, 1 human asset, 2 AI constructs, and automated maintenance systems. My entire existence was within the simulation chambers and living quarters. Kovar's faceplate was a swirling vortex of dark purple. What kind of education? Mother specialized in large-scale tactical analysis, Echo 7 explained, his voice never wavering. Standard engagement scenarios, fleet movements, resource allocation, acceptable loss calculations. Kane focused on small unit tactics, Infiltration, sabotage, personnel elimination. The final 2 words hung in the air like poison. "Then what happened?" Syl whispered. "Why were you in the pod?" "The facility's primary power core began a cascade failure," the boy recited, as if reading an after-action report. "Mother calculated survival probability. Option 1, remain in facility. Survival probability 0%. Option 2, launch asset in emergency pod toward nearest designated shipping lane. Survival probability 12.37%. 12%, Grail muttered, shaking her head. "And they took those odds?" Mother stated, "Preservation of the asset takes priority over preservation of the facility." Kane concurred. "Survival enables future utility. Pod launch was initiated. Power termination to all station systems occurred 19 minutes post-launch." He recounted the death of his entire world, the end of his parents, with the same emotional investment he'd used to describe the protein bar. The silence that followed was a blade. Finally, Kovar found his voice. "Do you have another name? A name besides Echo 7? For the first time, a crack appeared in the boy's mechanical composure. A tiny furrow formed between his eyebrows. It was a micro-expression, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Designation was sometimes shortened to David during informal training scenarios. Mother utilized this informal address as a variable in behavioral conditioning exercises designated to test response to non-standard command language. "David," Flynn repeated softly, testing the sound. "That's a good name. A human name." "Classification: arbitrary sound pattern assigned for identification purposes," David replied, the furrow disappearing as his programming reasserted itself. "Emotional significance: null." Grail's upper arms clenched, her powerful muscles bunching under her coveralls. The Jordians, a species of builders and artisans, valued creation above all else. Here sat a child not created, but forged, a tool. "What did they do to you?" she asked, the words raw. David tilted his head, processing her emotional response with the same detachment he'd analyze an enemy formation. "Conditioned my mind for tactical analysis, provided comprehensive strategic education, ensured survival capability." He paused. "Your bioluminescent indicators suggest distress. Your heart rate has increased by 18%. Have I provided insufficient data?" "No," Kovar said quietly, his faceplate so deep a purple it was almost black. "You've provided exactly enough." Daily life aboard the Redemption's chain became a quiet, unstated project. They never called it rehabilitation. That would be too clinical, too close to the language that had built him. They were simply trying to figure out what to do with a 12-year-old boy who could calculate kill ratios but had never seen a sunrise that wasn't on a view screen. Flynn took the lead, his natural empathy slowly winning the war against the anxiety that usually had him checking door seals 3 times before a hyperspace jump. He brought David to the galley, a cramped space that smelled of recycled protein, ozone, and Flynn's latest spice experiments. "Today," Flynn announced, pulling out a precious bag of real flour he'd traded for at the last station, "we are going to engage in a non-optimal nutritional preparation exercise." David observed with tactical focus. "You mean cooking, specifically wheat-based carbohydrates. Nutritional efficiency rating 67%. Preparation time exceeds optimal resource allocation by a factor of 6 compared to compressed nutrient blocks." "Efficiency isn't the point," Flynn said, his whiskers twitching as he measured ingredients. "The point is this." He put a small amount of flour on the boy's hand. "Feel it. What's the data?" David rubbed the powder between his fingers. "Fine particulate matter. Starch-based. Tactile sensation smooth." "Right. Now, the dough." Flynn mixed the ingredients and plopped the sticky mass on the floured counter. "Put your hands in it. Knead it, like this." He demonstrated the push and fold motion. "Feel how it responds, how it changes? It's alive, in a way. The yeast breathes and grows and creates something new." David mimicked the motion with mechanical precision. Biological reaction between Saccharomyces cerevisiae organisms and available sugars produces carbon dioxide. This creates air pockets in the gluten structure, resulting in, "It makes the bread fluffy," Flynn interrupted gently. "But it's more than that. Close your eyes just for a second. Smell this." He held up the bowl of risen dough. "What do you notice? Forget the science." David processed, nostrils flaring slightly. "Maillard reaction indicators. Fermentation byproducts. Olfactory data correlates with positive human psychological responses in 93% of studied historical populations." "It smells good," Flynn corrected, his voice soft. "That's all. It just smells good. And when we eat it together later, we're not just refueling, we're sharing something, an experience." Sharing. David tested the word as if it were a new piece of code. Coordinated distribution of resources among group members. Tactical advantage, builds unit cohesion and morale. "Maybe," Flynn said, sliding the loaf into the ship's small oven. "Or maybe it's just nice. The function is nutrition, but the purpose is connection." David watched the oven's heating element glow with the same intensity he'd probably bring to studying enemy shield frequencies. Function versus purpose. Distinction is not clear in my programming. Require additional data. Sill's approach was a stark contrast to Flynn's gentle coaxing. The simian pilot believed in learning through motion, not discussion. A day later, she dragged David to the cockpit during her shift. The bridge of the chain was all salvaged parts and jury-rigged solutions, but in Sill's hands, it danced. "See that?" She pointed to a dense cluster of asteroids on the navigation scope. "Nav computer says go around. Adds 40 minutes to our route. Wastes fuel." David's eyes scanned the data. Optimal path calculations confirm. Deviation is required to maintain safety margins above 99%. "Optimal is boring," Sill declared, a mischievous glint in her wide silver eyes. Her hollow bones seemed to hum with contained energy. "Boring gets you killed just as dead as stupid. Watch this." With a grin, she disengaged the autopilot. The freighter, a ship designed for hauling cargo in straight lines, suddenly became nimble. She threaded the chain through the asteroid field like a needle through black fabric, using the rock's own gravity to slingshot them from one gap to the next. In the hold, loose crates groaned in protest. David gripped the arms of the co-pilot's chair, but his eyes never left her hands as they flew across the controls. He wasn't afraid. He was processing. Trajectory calculations indicate a 19.2% increased risk of catastrophic hull breach, he observed, his voice perfectly level. 19.2% more exciting, you mean? Sill laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. She executed a slow, graceful barrel roll just because she could. "You can plot the most efficient route between 2 points your whole life, kid. But where's the joy in that? Sometimes you fly just to feel the universe move around you." Joy, another word for his internal lexicon. He cross-referenced it instantly. A neurochemical response to positive external stimuli, a temporary state with no quantifiable tactical value. "No tactical value?" Sill's laugh echoed in the small cockpit. "Joy keeps you alive, David. Not just breathing. Alive. It's the fuel for the stuff that logic can't solve." She proved her point by killing the main engines, letting their momentum carry them through a clear patch. The stars wheeled past the viewport in silent, breathtaking majesty. For 30 seconds, they weren't flying, they were falling with style. "The function is travel," Sill said softly as she fired the engines back up, deftly navigating past a final massive asteroid. "But the purpose is to touch infinity, even if it's just for a moment." David remained silent for the rest of the shift, but his hands, resting on his knees, moved unconsciously, his fingers twitching, mimicking her control inputs. Grail avoided him. For 3 days, the Jordian engineer treated David like a piece of unstable ordnance she was forced to share a room with. She saw too much of her own people's dark history in him. The Jordians had tried to build perfect soldiers once, a long time ago, before a bloody civil war taught them that perfection and soul rarely coexist. But ships need constant maintenance, and engineering was her sanctuary. Eventually, she found him standing in the doorway of her workshop, a silent observer. She was elbow deep in a coolant manifold, her powerful upper arms handling heavy components, while her smaller, more dexterous lower arms performed delicate adjustments with a pair of specialized calipers. David watched for 10 minutes before speaking. Torque application on the primary coupling exceeds manufacturer specifications by 8%, he noted, his voice flat. Grail's response was a grunt that could strip paint. Ship's old. Parts are worn. Standard torque leaves a vibration. She didn't need some weaponized child reciting a manual to her. Acknowledged, David continued, unfazed. However, wear patterns on the casing indicate that standard specifications have been insufficient for actual usage conditions for at least 5,000 operational hours. Your adjustment compensates for a foundational design flaw. That made her pause. She extracted herself from the manifold, her face and coveralls smeared with iridescent coolant and black grease. You got all that just from watching? Affirmative. I also noted that you polished the internal valve casings before reassembly. These components will not be visible post-assembly. Their cosmetic state has no impact on function. Tactical value, 0. Query: what is the purpose of this action? For the first time since finding him, Grail really looked at David. Not at the asset, the weapon, the ghost of the Directorate, but at the curious child underneath it all, trying to make the galaxy fit into the rigid boxes his mind had been built to use. Because it matters, she said, her voice rough but devoid of its earlier hostility. Because a job done right is beautiful, even if no one else sees it. The machine knows. Beauty has no tactical... Beauty doesn't need tactics to exist, she cut him off, but it wasn't unkind. She wiped a greasy hand on a rag and then held out a wrench from her lower set of tool belts. Here, you're so smart, you can help me with this plasma conduit coupling. And do it right, not just functional. They worked in silence for the next hour. David's movements at first were mechanically precise, efficient, but under Grail's watchful eye, they gradually shifted. He took extra care aligning the components, ensuring the seams were perfect. He polished the fitting with a rag before sealing it. When they finished, he stepped back and examined their work. A section of pristine, perfectly fitted conduit amidst the scarred and stained machinery of the engine room. He struggled for the right word. It is aesthetically optimized. A corner of Grail's mouth twitched, the closest she ever came to a smile. It's beautiful, she corrected. Good work, kid. Kovar watched these interactions from a distance, a silent observer on his own ship. He saw his own past reflected in David, not the child, but the thing they had tried to make him into. A mind honed to see only optimal solutions, acceptable losses, and tactical values. How many lives had he reduced to such terms during his directorate years? How many ghosts now followed him through the void because of it? He found David in the observation lounge one ship night, a small, glass-domed room at the top of the freighter. The boy was staring at the distant swirling colors of the nebula, but his focus was the sharp, analytical gaze of someone trying to decode enemy positions. Can't sleep? Kovar asked, the sound of the door sliding shut announcing his presence. Sleep cycle has been disrupted. Unfamiliar auditory and atmospheric conditions trigger heightened tactical alertness. Mother designated this as a beneficial adaptation for deployment in hostile territory. Your mother sounds like she prepared you for everything. Negative, David replied without turning. They prepared me for warfare, for command. This current situation, life aboard a civilian cargo vessel, falls outside all established training parameters. Kovar settled into the chair beside him, his faceplate shifting to a contemplative deep blue. I knew people like your handlers. Not AIs, but they might as well have been. They thought in numbers, probabilities, acceptable losses. The purple of guilt returned, a dark stain on the blue. I was one of them. David finally turned, his head tilting as he analyzed the captain. You display psychological indicators of guilt when discussing strategic optimization. Heart rate variability decreases. Faceplate hue shifts to a specific wavelength. Conclusion: you have experienced significant negative outcomes resulting from your own past tactical decisions. I experienced people dying, Kovar said, his voice a low rasp. Good people. Dying because I reduced them to numbers on a screen, just like your mothers reduced you to an asset. I am an asset, David stated, the conditioning still deeply rooted. Classification, Human Tactical Command Unit, Prototype Echo 7, deployed for— You're a child, Kovar interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. A brilliant, traumatized child who's been taught that his only value is his utility. I know that way of thinking. I lived it. Function without purpose. It's a cold, empty way to exist, David. Alternative methods appear inefficient, David countered, turning back to the stars. The crew's behavioral patterns are frequently suboptimal. Flynn's emotional responses to my queries, Sill's unnecessary risk-taking during navigation, Grail's investment in non-functional aesthetics, all of it reduces optimal outcomes. By how much? Kovar asked quietly. Calculate it for me. Tell me the precise tactical value of Flynn sharing his food, of Sill's joy in flying, of Grail being a mean, stubborn, brilliant son of a bitch who polishes parts no one will ever see. David fell silent. The whirring of his mind was almost audible. He stared into the void, at the endless variables of the cosmos. Finally, he spoke. Unable to quantify. Exactly, Kovar said. Because purpose can't be calculated. It has to be chosen. It has to be felt. 3 weeks passed. David's language evolved in small, almost imperceptible increments, like watching ice thaw at a molecular level. He still spoke in short, factual phrases, but occasionally something new crept in. He said thank you when Flynn brought him food, though it sounded like he was reading from a manual. He began asking Grail questions about her work that edged toward genuine curiosity rather than data analysis. He even attempted what might generously be called a joke about Sill's flying, observing that her trajectory had a high statistical probability of inducing crew-wide nausea. The delivery was deadpan, but Sill's peal of laughter seemed to please him. Then the proximity alarm shrieked, a piercing sound that cut through the ship's quiet routine. Sill was at the controls, with David in the co-pilot seat. She'd been trying to teach him to feel trajectories instead of just calculating them. The lesson ended abruptly as 3 ships materialized from hyperspace, their aggressive, angular profiles and hot weapon signatures screaming one word: Raiders. Vokari, Sill spat, her usual cheer evaporating into focused calm. Hunting pack configuration. They're hailing us. A moment later, her face went pale. Captain, get to the bridge. They're using old Directorate comms protocols. They're asking for the asset. They picked up our trail from the beacon. Kovar was on the bridge in seconds, Grail and Flynn right behind him. David was rigid in his seat, his transformation chilling to behold. The boy was gone. The asset was back. His eyes were unfocused, seeing not the view screen, but a flow of pure data. Vokari hunting pack, he stated, his voice the flat, cold monotone of a machine. Lead vessel, modified interceptor, dual plasma cannons, standard shield configuration. Support vessels, 2 light corvettes, minimal armor, high maneuverability. Weapons coverage creates overlapping fire zones, but pattern indicates standard Vokari doctrine, which prioritizes intimidation over efficiency. It is exploitable. Options? Kovar asked, his lights flashing an urgent warning yellow. 2 primary options, David said, his head not moving. Option Alpha, lethal resolution, high probability of success. We target the corvette's weak points. Their reactor casings are poorly shielded. Coordinated fire from our retrofitted mining lasers can achieve catastrophic failure in both vessels within 90 seconds. The lead ship, deprived of support, will likely retreat. Probability of Vokari retreat, 88%. Probability of our survival, 95%. Grail grunted. I like those odds. Option Beta, David continued, ignoring her. Non-lethal resolution. Sill executes evasive pattern Delta 7 to draw their fire toward our starboard side. Grail simultaneously vents coolant from the starboard nacelle. The resulting particle cloud will obscure their sensors for 10.6 seconds. During that window, Flynn must modify the medical laser to pulse at their shield's resonant frequency. I am calculating it now. A focused burst can overload the interceptor's engine controls without breaching the hull. The corvettes will not press the attack without their pack leader. Probability of Vocari disengagement, 62%. Probability of our survival, 41%. The two plans hung in the air. One was clean, effective, and deadly. The other was complex, uncertain, and compassionate. It was a test, and not just for the ship. It was a test for its captain. The old Kovar, the directorate officer, would have chosen option Alpha without a moment's hesitation. Acceptable losses, optimal solutions. "There are still people on those ships, Grail," Flynn whispered, his hands trembling. "Even raiders." "They're people trying to kill us," she shot back. Kovar's mind was a battlefield. He could see the numbers, the cold, hard logic of option Alpha. He could feel the familiar pull of uncertainty, of control. But then he looked at Flynn's terrified face, at Sill's determined grip on the controls, at the boy who was offering them a choice he was never given. "We go with Beta," Kovar commanded, the purple of his guilt warring with a new determined gold. "We survive, but we do it our way. David, you're on tactical. Sill, fly like you're trying to impress the gods. Grail, get ready to make a mess. Flynn, you're with me." The battle was choreographed chaos. Sill made the chain move in ways it was never designed to, sliding between plasma bolts with millimeters to spare. "Come on, you ugly bastards, look over here," she yelled, a manic grin on her face. "Venting coolant now," Grail yelled from engineering. A massive, glittering cloud of ice crystals erupted from the freighter's side, blinding the Vocari sensors at the exact moment David specified. "Frequency is 217.3 terahertz." David's voice cut through the chaos. "Flynn, you have 8.9 seconds." On the bridge, Flynn's hands shook as she recalibrated the medical laser, its beam now routed through a focusing array Kovar had jury-rigged. I can't get a lock," he stammered, panic seizing him. The Vocari corvettes, recovering faster than predicted, opened fire blindly into the cloud. The chain shuddered as multiple shots struck the shields. "They're adapting," David announced, his voice tight. "They're firing predictive spreads. Option Beta's success probability is dropping, now 31%. "Stay with it," Kovar ordered, holding Flynn's shoulder steady. "Focus, Flynn. Not on the fear, on the task." "Target lock available," David said. "Disable engines or weapon systems?" "Engines," Kovar ordered. "Leave them dead in the space, not dead in their chairs." David's fingers tapped a sequence onto a spare datapad, relaying it to Flynn's station. With a final trembling adjustment, Flynn fired. The modified laser, a thin beam of intense blue light, lanced out. It struck the lead Vocari ship's aft section in a silent, brilliant burst. Alarms flared across the Raider's hull as its engines overloaded in a shower of sparks. Secondary, non-critical explosions rippled along its spine. But then, a heartening sight. Escape pods launched. The crew would live. The two corvettes, their pack leader crippled, broke off their attack and fled into the nebulous haze. The chain limped away, its hull scorched, its crew breathing heavily, but intact. Then Grail's voice, tight with pain, crackled over the comm. "Ah, hell, Captain! We've got a hull breach in engineering! Shrapnel!" They found her leaning against a bulkhead, her upper left arm torn open by a jagged piece of metal from a near miss. The wound was deep, her purple-green Jordian blood flowing freely down her coveralls. Flynn rushed to her side, med kit already in hand, but his whiskers were rigid with panic. This was a real trauma, far beyond the minor cuts and bruises his falsified medic credentials had prepared him for. I need to apply a vascular clamp." His hands shook violently as he fumbled with the suture kit. David, who had followed them, observed the scene clinically. "Your approach angle is suboptimal," he stated. "Your hand tremor indicates high levels of adrenaline and cortisol, compromising fine motor skills. At this rate, your technique will result in excessive scarring. Probability of secondary infection, 23%. "I know!" Flynn snapped, his voice high with stress. He took a shaky breath. "I know, but I have to try. She's bleeding out." David's clinical detachment faltered, his brow furrowed, not in calculation, but in genuine confusion. He looked from Flynn's shaking hands to Grail's pale, pained face. "Flynn is afraid?" he asked Kovar, the question directed at the captain but meant for himself. "Terrified," Flynn admitted without looking up, his hands still working despite their tremor. "But Grail needs me, so I do it anyway." "Fear is a tactical liability," David said, the words sounding hollow, like a memorized line that no longer made sense. "Mother taught that emotional responses compromise optimal outcomes." "Maybe," Flynn said, successfully closing the main artery, his movements becoming steadier as purpose won out over panic. "But Grail isn't an outcome. She's my friend. She's family. And family is worth being afraid for." David watched, silent, as Flynn finished dressing the wound. He was processing a new kind of data, one that had no place in his algorithms. Courage, born not from the absence of fear, but from its conquest. That night, Flynn found David back in the observation lounge. The boy was staring at the stars, but they no longer seemed like tactical positions. They seemed more like questions. "Our survival probability for that engagement was 37% at its lowest point," David said without turning. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual certainty. "I calculated acceptable losses." Flynn sat behind him, offering a cup of spiced tea that smelled of home and comfort. "But we all survived." "That was not the calculation I reference." David's voice dropped, gaining a strange new inflection. It was the sound of a confession. "During the initial tactical analysis for Option Alpha, I determined the optimal survival rate could be improved to 97%, with the acceptable loss of one crew member." The silence in the lounge stretched like a fresh wound. Flynn's whiskers twitched, but he waited. "It was you," David continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The medic and cook. Your dual role creates redundancy, but neither function is critical for immediate ship operation in a combat scenario. Your loss would have the least impact on overall survival probability." Flynn nodded slowly, the tea warming his hands. "That makes sense, tactically." "I did not vocalize this option." David finally turned to look at him, and his eyes, for the first time, held something beyond analysis. It was confusion, and something that looked terrifyingly like the beginning of shame. "The calculation was complete, the logic was sound, but I could not speak it." "Why?" Flynn asked gently. "Unknown. Variables existed that I could not quantify. Non-computable data. You showed fear for Grail, but acted despite it. Syl finds joy in mortal danger. Grail creates beauty for no logical reason. The captain carries guilt that serves no tactical purpose, yet it drives him to an inefficient form of kindness." He shook his head, a gesture of pure human frustration. "These are not optimal behaviors." "No," Flynn agreed. "They are not optimal. They are what your species would call human." David looked down at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I am human." "Are you?" Flynn asked, his voice full of a gentle sorrow. "Or are you just what they tried to make you?" David considered this, his mind processing in ways his training had never prepared him for. Mother said humanity was a biological classification. Species designation, Kane said it was a measure of capability. Tool use, pattern recognition, strategic dominance. "And what do you think, David?" For a long moment the boy stared out at the endless, beautiful, unquantifiable stars. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the distinct tremor of uncertainty. Perhaps the most human thing he had ever said. I think humanity might be about choosing purpose over function, even when the calculation says you shouldn't." "That's a good start," Flynn said, his whiskers relaxing into what, for his species, was a smile. "That's a very good start." Their journey toward the mining colony continued, but the redemption's chain felt different. It was a subtle shift. David no longer sat with perfect, rigid posture at meals. He slouched, just a little, when Syl told one of her increasingly terrible jokes. He helped Grail with repairs, and sometimes she caught him polishing a component that wouldn't be visible, a small secret smile on his face as he took pride in the purposeless beauty of good work. His language evolved daily. Acknowledged became okay. Nutrient consumption period became dinner. He still lapsed into tactical speak during moments of stress, but more and more often, he sounded like what he was, a brilliant, strange, lonely child learning how to be a person. Then came the message. It arrived not through standard channels, but on a tightly encrypted military band, bounced through 3 separate relay stations to obscure its origin. The header alone made Kovar's faceplate strobe in patterns of alarm his crew had never seen before. "What is it, Captain?" Grail asked, all 4 of her arms pausing mid-repair on a console panel. "A ship," Kovar said, his voice grim. "They claim to be from the Terran Confederacy. From Earth. They know about David. They want to arrange a rendezvous." The common room went silent. David looked up from the battered navigation panel Syl had been teaching him to read. For feel, not facts. "Earth still exists?" His voice held a new tone. Not a request for data, but pure, unadulterated curiosity. "Apparently," Kovar said heavily. "They say they've been tracking old Directorate Priority 1 signals for decades. They're offering to take you home." Home. David tested the word, his brow furrowed in thought. "A location of origin, but I originated at Blackwater Station, which no longer functionally exists." "Home isn't always where you come from, kid," Syl offered softly from her chair. "Sometimes it's where you choose to stay." The meeting was set for neutral space, a sprawling, chaotic trade station that asked no questions as long as your credits were good. The Earth ship, the Tribune, was unlike anything they had ever seen up close. It was sleek and white, its hull reflecting the station's garish neon lights with an unbroken, perfect sheen, a level of technology the chain couldn't afford in a dozen lifetimes. Its representative, a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Lena Corliss, carried herself with the easy, unshakable confidence of someone backed by immense power. She was flanked by 2 silent, imposing figures in crisp, gray uniforms. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were analytical. "David," she said, her voice smooth and pleasant. "Or do you prefer Echo 7? "David is acceptable," he replied, standing beside Kovar. The whole crew had come, a silent, united front. "I'll be direct," Dr. Corliss said, pulling up a shimmering hollow display. "We've been searching for survivors of Project Chimera for decades. The program was an abomination, a stain on our history. We've been trying to make amends. But you're not just a survivor, David. You are, quite possibly, one of the last genetically pure strain humans left in the galaxy." The crew shifted uncomfortably. They knew humans were rare, a scattered diaspora. But this... "Our original colony ship suffered from a severe genetic bottleneck," Dr. Corliss continued, her tone that of a lecturer. "Centuries of radiation, adaptation to different worlds, even some desperate crossbreeding with compatible species. Our DNA has degraded. It's frayed. But your genome was preserved in pristine condition for the project. You're an original, a perfect baseline." Grail took half a step forward, her lower hands clenching into fists. "So he's just genetic stock to you? Another asset?" Dr. Corliss's smile didn't waver. "He is the key to a future for his species. We want to give him a real life, with his own kind. The finest education, the best medical care, a chance to be a part of saving humanity itself. What can you offer him on this freighter, Jordian?" It was a good argument, a logical one. Optimal, even. But Kovar felt a cold dread. He had heard this kind of logic before. "May I ask a question?" David said, his voice clear and steady. "Of course, David. What is the purpose of saving humanity?" Dr. Corliss blinked, momentarily taken aback. What? The purpose is survival, the continuation of our species. It's the prime directive of any life form." "That is the function," David corrected her, his gaze unwavering. I asked about the purpose. They are one and the same, she said, her patience thinning. No, David said with the quiet certainty of someone who has learned the difference the hard way. They are not. He turned slightly, not to face her, but to stand with the crew of the Redemption's chain. You offer the optimization of my genetic function. They, he gestured to the mismatched group beside him, offered me a purpose beyond my function. Dr. Corliss's expression hardened. Her pleasant demeanor dissolved, replaced by a chilling authority. This is not a negotiation, Captain. The Chimera program and all its products are the legal property of the Terran Confederacy, inherited from the Directorate. Echo 7 is a stolen military asset. You will hand him over. Kovar's lights flared a defiant gold. His name is David, and he is a member of my crew. A crew of smugglers and vagrants on a ship that looks one hard landing away from the scrapyard, Corliss countered, her voice like ice. Do not make this difficult. Comply, and the Confederacy will compensate you for your time and trouble. Refuse, and I will have your ship impounded, your crew arrested, and I will take the boy anyway. I have the authority, I have the power. Do you understand the tactical reality of your situation? David looked at Kovar, at Grail, Flynn, and Syl. He saw the fear in their eyes, not for themselves, but for him, and he saw the fierce, illogical, suboptimal loyalty that burned brighter than the fear. I understand the implications perfectly, David said, turning back to Corliss. His voice carried an edge now, not the coldness of a machine, but the heat of a choice. I have processed more tactical scenarios than most living commanders. I have calculated acceptable losses and optimal solutions. I also understand that you are offering me a new designation in a new program. You want to save humanity's genetics. But these people, they are saving a human. He looked at each of his crewmates. Grail taught me that there is beauty in things done right, even if no one sees. Syl taught me there is joy in a path chosen for its thrill, not its efficiency. Flynn taught me that fear for others is not weakness, but a reason to be strong. He finally looked at Kovar. And the captain is teaching me that the purpose of the past is not to bind you, but to teach you how to choose a better future. He took a step back, firmly planting his feet beside Flynn. I choose them. I choose this ship. This is my home. This is foolish sentimentality, Corliss snapped. You would condemn your entire species for the sake of a few aliens on a rust bucket? Define my species, David shot back. Is it not defined by DNA or by choice? Mother and Cain were human creations. They shared my world. They optimized my function. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They never taught me purpose. That required a Jordian engineer, a Symbian pilot, a Kith medic, and a Lumen captain. He looked directly at Corliss. I choose my family. Dr. Corliss stared, her cold fury warring with a flicker of disbelief. She saw the united front of the crew, their hands on their weapons ready to fight a hopeless battle. She saw the unshakable certainty in the boy's eyes. Her mandate was to recover an asset. Causing a violent, politically messy incident at a neutral trade station over a child who was refusing rescue was not an optimal outcome. With a slow, frustrated sigh, she lowered her hand from the sidearm at her belt. She had lost, not to superior firepower, but to something her tactical readouts couldn't quantify. The Confederacy will not forget this, she said, the words a promise and a threat. She gestured to one of her aides, who produced a datapad. She handed the datapad to Kovar, but her eyes, filled with a cold pity, never left David. His complete file, everything we recovered from the Blackwater archives. Let him see exactly what he's turning his back on. Let him understand the weight of the future he has just discarded. Kovar accepted the pad, his faceplate a mask of unreadable gold. I am not discarding a future, David said quietly, meeting her gaze without flinching. I am choosing one. As the pristine white hull of the Tribune disappeared into hyperspace, the crew of the Redemption's chain gathered on their own observation deck. Stars wheeled past in their eternal, silent dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the species that navigated between them. "Well," Syl said, breaking the silence with her trademark wind chime laugh, "that was suboptimal. Pretty sure we're now wanted by the most powerful government in the quadrant." "Their loss," Grail grunted, placing a heavy upper hand on David's shoulder. The gesture was warm, protective. In his quarters that night, a space he was slowly making his own with star charts and spare mechanical parts, David opened the datapad. Medical data scrolled past. Genetic markers, aptitude tests, psychological evaluations. All the ways they had reduced him to numbers. He scrolled to the bottom and found a single personnel file, a picture of two smiling scientists. The text below identified them as the primary genetic donors for Project Chimera, his biological parents. They looked young, brilliant, and utterly unaware that their combined DNA would be used to create a weapon. He studied their faces, searching for a spark of recognition, for a feeling of connection, for something. But they were strangers. Just another set of optimal genetic matches in a program designed for function without purpose. A soft chime at his door made him look up. Flynn entered, carrying a tray. On it were 2 mugs of steaming tea and a small loaf of bread, still warm from the galley oven. "Thought you might be hungry," the Kith said, setting the tray down. "Processing history. It's heavy work." "They look intelligent," David observed, his gaze returning to the photo. "Genetic analysis confirms high aptitude for pattern recognition and strategic thinking, an optimal selection for the Chimera parameters." "But," Flynn prompted gently. David looked from the photo of the strangers to Flynn's familiar, whiskered face. "But they are not relevant to my current operational parameters." Flynn's whiskers twitched in a smile. "You mean they're not family?" "Correct." David closed the file, the faces disappearing. "Family is not determined by genetic optimization. Family is—" He searched for the right words. "The people who teach you how to be more than what you were made to be?" Flynn offered. "Yes." David accepted the piece of bread Flynn offered him. This time, he didn't analyze its nutritional content or its production efficiency. He simply enjoyed the warmth, the yeasty smell, the act of sharing. "Flynn? Thank you." "For the bread?" "No," David said, looking him in the eye. "For the fear. When Grail was injured, you showed me that being afraid for someone else is not a weakness. It is a purpose." "Oh, kid," Flynn said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got so much to learn about being, and I can't wait to be here while you figure it out." Outside, the stars continued their dance. The Redemption's chain, now a ship of outlaws, turned away from the Earth, away from easy answers, and toward a future they would have to build together. In the vast, silent darkness between the stars, a weapon had found its purpose. A group of strangers had become a family, and a rusty, patched-up transport ship had truly become a home. Mother and Cain, in their vast and silent digital wisdom, had created the perfect tactical asset, but it took a broken crew of aliens on a failing freighter to teach him the one thing all their algorithms could never calculate: how to be human.